The NFL Combine just changed everything, and specifically for the 7 wide receivers we're going to talk about in this video. Not only did these guys test great, they ran fast, but they also made themselves millions of dollars and completely flipped draft boards. So let's get into those 7 wide receivers that are skyrocketing up draft boards right now and you need to know. And we'll start with the player who maybe made himself the most money at the NFL Combine, and that is the wide receiver out of Texas, Matthew Golden, who there's a lot to like about him right here. If we pull it up, he's 21 years old. He has solid size, 5'11", 191 pounds. There's nothing wrong with that build at all. And I say he's the biggest winner because a lot of the other top wide receivers at the Combine, Ibuka from Ohio State, McMillan as well, these are some of the top guys in the draft. Heck, even Travis Hunter didn't test. And what did Golden do? Not only did he test, he went out there at the Combine and his 40 time, if you scroll to it right here, a 4.29 40 time. 4.29, insane. It was the fastest among the wide receivers, as you can see in this tweet from Fox right here at the NFL Combine. And you can see overall 99th percentile for his size. That is top 1% 40 time for somebody that weighs around 190 pounds like he does. He absolutely blew it away when his other competition in the first round wide receivers, those types of guys, didn't even test. Overall, when you factor everything in, you can see Ryan Heath. We talked about him in the running back version of this video that released earlier this week. You can see right here the 12th best in this century in terms of his athletic score was Matthew Golden. He got a 99 rating there. He was number 1 in this class out of all the wide receivers who tested. So obviously, if you were like the number 1 athlete in the class, you were a probably late first round pick coming into the Combine and you blow it away, yeah, you're going to be moving up. And he will certainly be making himself a lot of money as well. Now you can see he spent 3 years in college. His first 2 years were in Houston. He had like okay years, right? It was Houston. It wasn't anything in terms of like an awesome offense there, but then he transfers to the University of Texas, the Longhorns. He stays in Texas, the state, and he puts up 58 catches, 987 yards. He leads this team in receiving by over 200 yards more than anybody else, which it's a star-studded roster yet again in Texas because they're able to pay people a lot of money to come there and play for them. So there's a lot of talent that he had to compete with, and he put up nearly 1,000 yards. It's also worth pointing out here that on Player Profiler, you can see every single year he was involved on special teams. You can see it started out in Houston, and then he gets a little bit more involved these final 2 years. That's worth pointing out because normally you're putting your best playmakers, your best athletes as punt returners, as kickoff returners. It kind of hints to your athleticism, and we just got that confirmation at the Combine. Now, outside of the great speed and the production that we saw at Texas last year, here are some of the other positives about Golden's game. He's not only great at accelerating, but also decelerating at the top of routes. He has yards after the catch ability, great hands and body control, and he's able to fight through contact at the catch point. And not to mention, he's also a great route runner, and we saw that only get better as the season went on last year at Texas. The areas I would like to see him improve are just his press releases at the line of scrimmage and also his blocking. But he can be the guy for a team. He could be a number 1 outside receiver for a team, and there's a lot of teams right now with releasing a ton of veterans we're seeing every single week. DK Metcalf wants to trade. Tyler Lockett's getting released, right? Christian Kirk's getting released. A ton of veterans are getting released or they're on the open market right now. This can be a young filler with a lot of upside in Matthew Golden, and we saw him in the biggest game of the year against maybe the best game of the entire season, Arizona State in the college football playoff. He goes off. He comes through in the biggest moments of the year, 141 yards, a touchdown, a late overtime touchdown as well to keep the game alive on 4th down. He was the guy that Quinn Ewers went to and trusted most, and he delivered. Now, in terms of the teams where he could be a fantastic fit, I think the Pittsburgh Steelers can use a wide receiver. Of course, George Pickens is an outside wide receiver, but I think Matthew Golden on the outside as well and 2 wide receiver sets makes a lot of sense for a team that needs a wide receiver for whoever their quarterback ends up being. And I think the Rams could make a lot of sense as well. As of recording this, Cooper Kupp has not yet been released, but there's hints of him being traded away, right, with his contract and his age and $30 million potentially being on the books. And if you're going to have Puka Nacua out there with no Cooper Kupp and nobody else, you're probably going to have to draft a wide receiver. Golden in the mid to late rounds makes some sense. Even though the Washington Commanders just signed Deebo Samuel, I think that Golden as their primary outside receiver opposite Terry McLaurin and 2 wide receiver sets could be appealing. In terms of a draft comp for Matthew Golden, if you want to think about an NFL player, I see a lot of Chris Olave to his game. According to Mock Draftable, right now he looks like he's going to be a first round pick, 28th overall, and I think after the NFL Combine and over these next couple of weeks and maybe at his pro day, that's only going to increase. I would assume he goes somewhere around pick 20. Okay, so that's the guy who probably won the most at the Combine, but there's a lot of other wide receivers whose stocks are rising. Like, it's a loaded running back class, but the wide receivers, some of these guys did stand out at the Combine. And another one of those names is Jaden Higgins. This isn't the only wide receiver we're going to talk about from Iowa State, but this is the guy who can be an ex-alpha outside receiver for you, given his size at 6'4", 214 pounds. He has a great build at the wide receiver position, but that's not all. Because at the NFL Combine, he came out here and he showed out. He ran a 4.47 40 time. At his size, that's 94th percentile speed score, 87th percentile burst as well. And a lot of that burst, when it comes from his vertical jump, it was one of the best vertical jumps for his size that we've ever seen. So this is a guy who has a lot of upside in terms of what he did at the Combine. What did he do in college? Well, his first 2 years, he was at a small school, Eastern Kentucky. He had 394 yards. Then he breaks out for 757 yards. And then he transfers to Iowa Iowa State for his final 2 college seasons. And at Iowa State is where things really come together. He has 53 catches for 983 yards in his junior year, but look at this, 18.6 yards per reception is insane. He's winning downfield, he's winning after the catch, and then he has his best season, so he continues to get better every single year right here. 87 catches, nearly 1,200 yards, a very respectable and good 13.6 yards per reception. He got better every single season despite his competition getting tougher when he transferred to Iowa State. Now, one of the nice things about Higgins is that he can move into the slot and find success as well. Like, he played 70% of his snaps on the outside last year, but he played 30% in the slot and was efficient there too. Some other things you should know about Higgins are that he is a great route runner, has awesome body control, very impressive football IQ. He's great at tracking the deep balls, and his tempo is awesome. He could separate by accelerating and decelerating. Some of the things I would like to see him work on as he enters the NFL, and I already assume he's doing that, is his route tree and his run block. And another big positives that teams are going to like is from this tweet right here from Zach Cruz on Twitter, and this is a big part of his game. It's his hands. He only dropped 7 passes on 350 career targets in college. That's absolutely insane. It's a 3% drop rate, if not lower. And he only had 3 total drops on 200 targets at Iowa State the last 2 years, despite the tougher competition. So again, you're looking at a 1 to 1.5% drop rate. It's elite. This guy catches everything that comes his way. And in a lot of ways, he reminds me of like an earlier career Kenny Golladay. If you remember Golladay before he got to the Giants, when he was on the Lions and he was producing in his middle years between 24 and 26 years old, that's who he reminds me of. I think Higgins helped himself a lot at the NFL Combine. Right now, Mock Draftable is projecting him to go in the 3rd round. I wouldn't be shocked if now he's kind of inching towards that 2nd round. I think one team that would make sense for Higgins is going to be the Green Bay Packers. Now, this is assuming that they don't sign Devontae Adams, who's now a free agent, or a trade for DK Metcalf, which there's some rumors, because if they get one of those guys, or maybe heck both those guys, well, then they obviously have their number 1 outside receiver. But until then, Christian Watson's banged up. Jaden Reed isn't an X receiver. They need a guy. Now, I mentioned Higgins isn't the only Iowa State wide receiver because we have to talk about Jalen Noel. And yes, I know it looks like it's pronounced Noel. He came out and said that it's Noel. So Jalen Noel out of Iowa State, he is not the bigger wide receiver here. He's 5'10", 194 pounds, more of the slot weapon compared to Higgins on the outside for Iowa State. They had some great weapons out there, and Noel is somebody else who also found a lot of success at the Combine. As you can see, based on his 40 time right here, he had one of the better 40 times at the NFL Combine. He ended up running a 4.39 40 time, which was faster than expected. It was fantastic. It's obviously going to help his draft stock, and his overall Combine performance was one of the best that we saw in the entire weekend. There's that 4.39 40 time. That's great. 99th percentile burst score. Now, what does that mean? It means that he led every single wide receiver at this Combine in both his broad jump and vertical jump, and across all positions, he ranked 2nd overall in both of those categories. He's a beast. And oh yeah, he was one of the few people across any position to actually do all the drills. He said, nah, I'm not sitting on any of them. I'm confident. His agility testing, the short shuttle, all of that, 78th percentile. His catch radius, so some of those drills in the open field, 80th percentile. All of this was fantastic. And as I mentioned, he went to Iowa State with Higgins, who we talked about previously. These guys were kind of partners in crime there. You can see last year, they were just neck and neck in every category. Jalen Noel ended up leading the team with 1,194 yards, just 11 more than Jaden Higgins. Higgins had 7 more catches as well. If you were to look back over a couple of years here, you would normally see that Noel would be the slot wide receiver, Higgins would be the guy on the outside, and both players ranked top 10 in their conference in receiving yards on the same team. And the nice thing about Jalen Noel is he got better every single year at Iowa State. He was there for 4 seasons, and as you can see this just based on his receptions or receiving yards, every single year these things increased. Here's the receptions column on Player Profiler. Note that he had 60 plus receptions in all 3 of his final seasons, which is awesome to see, and he broke out over his final 2 years. Notably in 2024, nearly 1,200 yards like we mentioned that led the team, 81 receptions, 80 depending on the platform tracking that you're using. He also ended up having 9 carries for 38 yards, so he chipped in there as well, while playing about 75% of his snaps out of the slot. He was a weapon for this team. Now, specifically where this guy wins when I'm looking at his film is he has some of the best footwork in the class, and that's kind of why he did the agility drills to show that. He has yards after the catch ability, he's great in the short area, and he has full body control on his routes, which creates deception. Now, some of the areas I would like to see him improve is his route tree and his physicality when he's facing some bigger cornerbacks. But this stat was pretty crazy by Ben Fennell on Twitter right here. So out of the NFL, at the NFL Combine, I mentioned that Noel did every single test. He also did the bench press, where he repped at least 20 reps of 225 pounds, which for his size is great. There's only been 5 wide receivers ever at the Combine in 23 years to run a sub 4.4 and bench press at least 20 reps at 225 pounds. DK Metcalf, Kevin White, these huge guys, Eddie Royal, who's somewhat smaller, and then Jalen Noel. So he is in fantastic company in terms of veteran receivers. Obviously, some better than others when we're thinking about Kevin White compared to DK Metcalf. But this is a very rare athlete who also has the college production background. He was coming into the combine, also projected to be a third-round pick. I wouldn't be shocked now if Noel is the number one slot wide receiver taken off the board this year. I think he's going to be pushing towards that top 5 range of wide receivers, if not already locked into it, which means there's a chance now pretty easily that we can see him going in the second round, if not the early second round. A potential fit for him could be the Houston Texans. Again, this is going to depend on what happens in free agency when that opens up on March 12th. Do they just bring back Stephon Diggs? There's a ton of veterans out there. But outside of Nico Collins right now, since Tank Dell is looking at missing the whole season, and as of this recording, Stephon Diggs is hitting the open market, there's not much there. There's John Mechie, who showed some flashes in like a game or two last year, but maybe they bring in a more reliable slot wide receiver in Jalen Noel based on his college production. All right, so those are the Iowa State guys. They're both great. Now let's get away from Iowa State and go to Utah State. Yes, Utah State has a wide receiver that's worth mentioning in Jalen Royals. Jalen Royals, who is a very nice sized wide receiver, and after the NFL Combine, we can see he also has some solid athleticism. He's 6 foot, 205 pounds, and when we look at what he did at the NFL Combine, he ran. He basically only ran, but he ran really fast. A 4.42 for his size is great. That's 86th percentile speed score. All of that is fantastic. You see some of the quick stats right here on Player Profiler. His college target share, meaning he earned 34.5% of his college targets, 97th percentile, top 3% of all time. This guy was a target earner in college, and he's an athlete. Specifically, he broke out in 2023 after 2022 not doing much at Utah State. He goes over 1,000 yards. He averages over 15 yards per catch. He continues this production in 4 less games in 2024, 834 yards here. Again, averages 15.2 yards per catch. This is a guy who had a season-ending foot injury. He was actually able, though, to go to the combine, which was nice to see, and able to recover in time to run that 40 time. But he was on pace yet again to have another 1,000+ yards and another strong season for Utah State. If you're wondering where he plays as a 200+ pound receiver, mostly on the outside. Last year in 2024, he played about 78 to 80% of his snaps as an outside wide receiver. And if you're wondering where he wins based on the film that I watched, well, let's get into that. He's a smooth route runner who uses his leverage to win. He has amazing body control and field awareness, and he's awesome after the catch. Now, in terms of areas where he can improve, I mean, one of the things he can improve is just the competition he was facing. He faced weaker competition. I would like to see his run blocking improve, and in the intermediate ranges, like he wins at the line of scrimmage and downfield, the intermediate ranges, I'd like to see some more. But even though overall he faced weaker competition, he faced Boise State, who was a top 25 team when he went up against them, and he put up over 200 yards. Now, here's a pretty cool stat I found on Twitter from Football Insights. Be sure to follow them if you're on Twitter. Jalen Royals owns a 3.96 yards per route run. It's insanely efficient. Like in the NFL, if you're touching 3, that's elite. You're probably leading the NFL on his 104 career snaps out of the slot. The only wide receivers drafted since 2020 with at least that much of a yards per route run on 100+ routes out of the slot: CeeDee Lamb, Devonta Smith, Jamison Williams, and Jalen Waddle. We're talking about all first-round wide receivers, high talent, especially Jameis Winston after this past year. We can now say that all those 4 guys are pretty strong to solid to great NFL wide receivers. Again, it's just one stat we're looking at, but this is how efficient this guy was in college. I think he's going to be like a 3rd-round pick. Wouldn't be shocked if he goes in the 2nd round now for a team that needs a wide receiver on the outside, and he reminds me a decent amount, maybe a little bit bigger version of a Jaden Reed. A nice fit for him. We mentioned the Commanders earlier, who could use like a Matthew Golden on the outside. I think they could still use another outside receiver, especially a bigger wide receiver somewhere that I think the Commanders can use. You have Deebo Samuel, you have Terry McLaurin. These are faster guys. They're not the biggest players. I think you're going to get maybe a little bit more upside out of adding a bigger body, and that could be Royals on the outside. Now, this next guy for most people is like the 15th, 20th ranked wide receiver in the class, but I think after the combine, he might be jumping up into the top 10. But before we get there, I have to let you know about the sponsor of the program today, who keeps the lights on here and allows us to do this for free for all you beautiful people, and it is our partner. They've been our partners for 4 years now, and it's Prize Picks. Prize Picks is a very simple format. You just take the more or less on player statistics. For football, do you think somebody's going to have more or less than 300 passing yards? It's that simple. You take the more or less, and you can win real money. Here's an example of this right now. We're talking about wide receiver prospects. Here's the wide receivers for the NFL. Their lines already for next season are up. If you think Jamar Chase is going to go over 1,349 receiving yards, you just select the more. If you think he's going to go less, you select the less, and they have this for all the top receivers in the league. Oops. And as the season gets closer, you'll have even more options as you scroll down here, but they already have a ton out there, which is actually crazy this early, this many lines out there, despite all the changes that are going to happen, meaning that this is a pretty soft market right now. And here's the best part about this. If you scan the QR code on the screen, there's also a link in the description below, and you use the code SAL23, they'll just give you a free $50 to play with. They said, oh, Sal sent them, here's $50. You guys can go play with that. If you never want to play again, that's completely fine. If you like it, stick around. Who cares? Just get the free $50. And again, you get that free $50 with code SAL23. Just scan the QR code or click the link in the description. When you support our partners, it goes a really long way for me to be able to do this for all of you, so I appreciate you in advance. Now, that sneaky wide receiver I was talking about is Ty Felton out of Maryland. Ty Felton, who again, I think a lot of people have him outside their top 12, top 15 wide receivers. I think now he's going to jump up into the top 10. 6'1", 183 pounds. What he did at the NFL Combine was great. He ran a 4.37 40 time, tied for the, I think, top 5 in the class at the wide receiver position. He had the third best 10-yard split getting out of the break overall. A 92nd percentile burst score is also fantastic right here, according to Player Profiler as well. He is an elite athlete. He has the speed, which we kind of knew if you watch his film, and we'll get into that. And he also has the burst. But just to show you how good of an athlete this guy is, if we pull up Kent Lee right here, he does something called the RAS score, the relative athletic score. He has a huge database dating back to 1987. Ty Felton, who's not known as a top prospect by any means by a lot of people, he ranks out of wide receivers to attend the Combine since 1987, 138th out of over 3,400 players. So he is easily a top 10% athlete at the position all time. And I think he's somebody who's going from being a 5th to a 6th round pick to now like a 3rd or a 4th round pick in the NFL draft. This is a guy who spent all 4 of his college seasons at Maryland, where he really didn't do much the first 2 years. You have 5 catches, 23 catches. So he had 28 total catches for like 350 yards, but he starts to break out in 2023. 48 catches, 723 yards. And his big year was 2024, where he had some big games against tough Big Ten competition, almost 100 receptions, crazy, 149 targets, over 1,100 yards in the season, and a massive 30% target share. Anytime you're pushing over 24% in college, it's good. Touching 30 is elite. And I mean, based on how he started the season last year, if we scroll through the game logs, you have to scroll to the bottom here, and you can see in August 31st, the first game. Based on how he started the season, let's scroll to the production right here. I thought this guy might be like a locked in top first, probably 2nd round pick. Starts the season with 7 catches for 178 yards, 11 catches, 152, 9 for 117, and 14 for 157, scoring a touchdown in at least all of those games. So he starts red hot the first month of the season, is arguably, if not the best wide receiver in the Big Ten, right up there with some of the Ohio State guys. And this is a guy who worked into the slot as well. Like, don't get me wrong, he was an outside receiver 70% of the time using his speed, but he went into the slot about 30% of the time. He had some versatility there. And in terms of his overall pros, after watching the film that I had on him, he has elite speed that helps him with ball tracking and over-the-shoulder catches. He knows how to find the soft spots in the defense and surprisingly can beat man coverage at the line of scrimmage despite his size. Now, the only concerns I do have about him is blocking, is the fact that we did see 8 drops out of him in college. Is there somewhat of a concern there? And just fighting through contact is another one. But this guy's going to be one of the fastest wide receivers in the NFL draft. And I think now, like Mock Draftable is showing, that he's probably going to be a 4th round pick. Wouldn't be shocked if he's a 3rd round pick. Before the Combine, there was probably a chance he was going to fall into the 5th, maybe even 6th round. I think he compares to a guy like Marquez Valdes-Scantling. You hear that name right now and you go, oh, he didn't do anything. He had some solid seasons in the NFL, especially with the Green Bay Packers. He's definitely an NFL talent Scantling. And if Ty Felton can be anything like that, he's worth a 4th round pick. Now let's get to a couple of deep cuts here. Out of Florida, we'll go with Deke, who is 22 and a half years old. I'm not too concerned about the age. 6'1", 196 pounds. That's all fine. I liked what this guy did at the NFL Combine. Another guy who is maybe going to be undrafted 6th, 7th round pick. Now he's moving up. Runs a 4.34 40 time. That's 93rd percentile speed score. Another guy who did all the tests. The agility was great. The burst was off the charts. The catch radius was awesome. He showed out at the NFL Combine and it helped him make more money. And we showed you the relative athletic score earlier when we were talking about some of the prospects. Look at this one right here for Dyke. In this, you can see he ranked 70th out of over 3,400 wide receivers since 1987. So he's like a top 3% athlete of all time, at least that has attended the NFL Combine and worked out, which is great. If you look at his production in college, it's not going to be anything crazy. That's why he's not a 1st, 2nd, 3rd round talent. But in his final year here, he put up over 42 catches at Florida for over 783 yards, 18.6 yards per reception, which is great. He's a downfield weapon. He's somebody to keep an eye on. And so is this next guy, who was not even in like top 20 or top 25 rankings for most people. And now after the Combine, he definitely will be. And that's going to be Isaac Tesla, who is, I mean, a lot to like out of this guy. 6 foot, 214 pounds. So that's great. He played for Arkansas. And if we scroll over to his Combine testing numbers here on Player Profiler, again, another guy who made the most of the Combine, did all the tests. 4.43 40 time is 97th percentile. That's top 3% of all time at his size. 91st percentile burst. Agility is off the charts. Catch radius is 98th percentile. I mean, this guy's an athlete upon athletes. And if we look at what he did overall in college, again, it's a smaller program, or somewhat smaller program compared to the top end guys. If we're talking about the Ohio States, the Alabamas of the world, at Arkansas, did face some tough competition. Last year, he had had his best season, 28 catches, 545 yards, averaged nearly 20 yards per reception. This is a big, fast, versatile, and dynamic wide receiver who won downfield in an offense that didn't really capitalize the passing game much, and he was still able to put up over 500 yards. If we go back to Ryan Heath's tweet about the top 10 wide receivers from this past year, you can see Tesla ranks with a 94 overall grade as a top 5 athlete in this class at the wide receiver position. That's definitely going to help his draft stock. I think he probably now goes in the 4th or 5th rounds of drafts, which means he should be on your radars when it comes to fantasy football, definitely dynasty leagues as well. So these are the wide receivers who I believe are skyrocketing up draft boards the most, whether that's dynasty draft boards, best ball draft boards, or just real life NFL draft boards after what they did at the combine. We actually already released the running backs version of this video. It will pop up right here. You can check that out. And if you enjoyed this content, be sure to subscribe so you can see all the content that we have upcoming for the NFL draft and then the NFL season and fantasy football when that comes. Appreciate you all, and I'll see you in the next one.